You ever have one of those days where everything just goes wrong? You do everything right, you put in the work, and still, failure? Well, back in the early 20th century, an anthropologist named Evans-Pritchard, he spent time with the Azande people in Central Africa, and he discovered they had this incredibly powerful, all-encompassing answer for that exact problem. And honestly, their explanation is so logical from the inside, it might just make you rethink the whole idea of misfortune.
Right, so it all kicks off with a feeling we've all had, right? The problem of misfortune. It's that nagging feeling, that frustration when things just don't make sense. You know, when bad luck just seems to zap you out of the blue for absolutely no good reason.
And this really is the big question, isn't it? Why do bad things happen to good people? For the Azande, look, this wasn't some philosophical thing to just kick around. No, it was a real, practical, everyday puzzle. So put yourself in their shoes for a second. Imagine you're an absolute expert at what you do. You've got it down to a science. You do everything by the book, and you still fail. Why? What gives?
So Evans-Pritchard tells this great story about a master woodcarver. This guy knew his stuff. He knew the best woods, all the right techniques. He'd carved hundreds, maybe thousands of perfect bowls. But then, every once in a while, snap, a piece of wood would just split. And he knew he hadn't made a mistake. So what happened? What was going on?
Or, okay, think about a potter. She's using the exact same clay, the same firing method that has worked 99 times out of 100. But on that 100th time, crack. The pot just breaks. See, it's not about being bad at your job. It's about that one specific, totally maddening failure. And that brings us to what is probably the most famous Azande example of them all.
Okay, picture this. An old granary collapses. Now, the Azande are not fools. They know exactly how it happened. They can walk over, look at the wreckage, and see, yep, termites ate through the wooden supports. That's chain of events number one, okay? At the very same time, you've got some people just sitting underneath it trying to get out of the hot midday sun. That's chain of events number two. Totally separate. So the Azande question isn't, how did the granary collapse? They know that. The real question, the important question, is why did it collapse at that exact moment when those specific people were sitting right there?
And for that question, the question of the unbelievable, unlucky coincidence, the Azande had one single powerful answer: witchcraft. But hold on. Before you start picturing pointy hats and bubbling cauldrons, you need to know their idea of a witch is probably nothing like what you're thinking.
You see, for the Azande, witchcraft, or mangu as they called it, it wasn't some kind of spell or a deal with the devil. No, it was a physical thing, a substance. They believed some people were just born with it, almost like an extra organ attached to their liver. It was hereditary, passed from father to son, mother to daughter. It was seen as just a simple, if kind of unfortunate fact of biology.
And they were super precise about this distinction. A witch doesn't actually have to do anything. No spells, no secret rituals, just their own envy or their jealousy. That psychic energy alone is enough to cause harm. It's about who they are. Now, that's totally different from sorcery. Sorcery is something someone does. It's the act of using bad magic, and hey, anyone could learn to do that if they wanted to. This distinction, right here, is the key to their whole system.
Okay, so how does this whole idea of witchcraft loop back to that collapsing granary? This is where it gets really interesting. This is where you can see the brilliance of the Azande logic at work.
So let's break it down. The Azande are totally cool with the natural cause. Termites ate the wood. Fact. They're also totally cool with the common sense reason people were there. It was hot. They wanted shade. Fact. Witchcraft is the bridge. It's the force that connects those two totally separate chains of events. It's the missing link. The witch's mangu didn't physically push the granary over. It just made sure it fell at the exact most tragic moment possible, right when those people were sitting there.
This quote from Evans-Pritchard just nails it perfectly. Witchcraft explains why events are harmful to man and not how they happen. See? Their belief doesn't contradict the facts on the ground. They know it was an elephant that charged the man, not a witch turning into an elephant. But witchcraft answers the much more important social question, why did that elephant charge that specific man on that specific day? It explains the why, not the how. It explains the misfortune.
All right, so if witchcraft is a real and constant danger in your world, you can't just sit around and take it. You need a way to fight back. And the Azande people, they had this whole sophisticated system set up to identify the witch and, well, neutralize the threat.
So, let's put you back in their shoes again. You've been bewitched. You know it. You've fallen sick. Your crops are failing. Something is up. You suspect witchcraft. So what now? What do? Well, you don't just sit there and worry about it. You take action.
And you've basically got two main paths you can go down. For the really serious stuff, you consult the oracles. Think of these as the cold, hard scientific authority. This is like their Supreme Court. Then, for something more public, something more theatrical and maybe even therapeutic, you call in the witch doctors.
Now, the highest authority, the big one, was the poison oracle, or bench. And let me tell you, this was a serious, solemn ritual. It wasn't taken lightly. A special poison, probably strychnine-based, was fed to a chicken while a question was asked. Something like, if Bob is the witch, poison oracle, kill the fowl. And the fate of that chicken, that was the final verdict. When it came to the most important decisions in Azande life, we're talking marriage, going to war, even justice for a murder, the word of the poison oracle was absolute final law.
The witch doctor, the Binza, was a completely different animal. This person was part performer, part healer. They would hold these big, dramatic, public seances with music and dancing to expose witches. They'd even use sleight of hand to, pull a bewitched object from a sick person's body. But here's the really interesting bit. Everybody kind of knew the surgery part was a show. It was theater. But at the same time, they absolutely believed that the real medicines, the herbal remedies the witch doctor gave them, were genuinely effective. It was this public, almost cathartic way to face down misfortune.
Okay, but wait a minute. You're probably thinking, what happens when an oracle gets it wrong? Or when a witch doctor gets caught as a total fraud? Why didn't the whole system just, fall apart under the weight of these contradictions?
Well, here's why. The system survived because it was a perfect, self-sealing web of belief. First off, accusations always followed the lines of social tension, jealousies, rivalries. It made social sense. It also provided a real system for justice, and it even worked as a kind of moral compass, right? Because nobody wants to be accused of witchcraft, so you'd think twice before being a jerk. But here is the most crucial part. Any failure, any contradiction, was just explained by the system itself. If an oracle was wrong, oh, well, another witch must have used their own magic to interfere. Or maybe the operator broke a taboo. The core belief itself could never, ever be proven false. It was a closed loop. It was completely unfalsifiable. So all of this brings us to a final thought, a chance to kind of turn the camera around, away from the Azande and point it back at ourselves.
So after all this, here's the big question. Is the Azande belief system irrational? And Evans-Pritchard's groundbreaking argument was, no, absolutely not. He argued that if you just accept their one single starting point, that this thing called Mongo exists and it explains unlucky coincidence, then every single thing that follows from that premise is perfectly internally logical and consistent.
Look, the Azande logic of witchcraft isn't primitive thinking at all. It's actually a really elegant, a really coherent social tool for navigating a chaotic world. And it kind of forces us to ask a tough question. What are our unwritten rules? I mean, when we blame something on bad luck, or we talk about karma, or we just throw our hands up and say it must be fate, aren't we doing the exact same thing? We're using ideas to fill that gap between what happens and why it happens specifically to us. The only difference is, the Azande just built a much more formal, more explicit system to answer that same deeply human question.